Welcome to Module C. Module C is all about inquiry. This is action research, and it differs from what you did in your teacher prep program as a student teacher for a couple of reasons. We are engaging in inquiry to see whether or not students are learning. Chances are in your student teaching, you may have looked at assessments and you may have measured your students' growth, but most likely you were working with students that were not your own, and you were also really focused on the lesson design and planning of it all. And with induction, you're going to be really focused on the outcome. What we're looking for is student growth from the beginning to the end of an entire lesson series. You're going to do this 3 times throughout your experience in induction, throughout your 2 years. So in year 1, you spend the whole first semester looking at your context for teaching and learning, and then doing a self-assessment and going on those observations. At the end, or not at the end of the year, but at the end of that and into the second half of the year, second semester, you're going to start focusing on your first inquiry. If you are a year 2 teacher, you'll spend the entire year in that inquiry cycle. You're going to do 2 inquiries throughout the course of the year. Now remember, if you're a year 2 and you're at the same school, your Module A, Context for Teaching and Learning, is going to be much shorter. You won't have to redo a lot of those things because you don't need to learn all about your school if you're at the same school. Of course, you're still going to have to look at your students, and there will be some things to do, like calling home and looking at your instructional environment, but really it's more about fine-tuning, and then you can jump directly into your inquiry. Now, the Individualized Induction Plan is a document that you're going to revisit throughout the entire inquiry. So throughout a course of about 2 or 3 months that you're planning and executing a lesson series and then looking through the results of that summative assessment, you will continuously come back. You're going to revise it, retweak it, and you're going to add information to this. So I'm going to go through and talk about the entire document, but I want you to know that this is happening over the course of about 2 or 3 months. It is not something that you're going to be able to sit down and do in one sitting. The first thing you want to do when you start off with your inquiry is focus your inquiry. Cells 1 through 4, or boxes 1 through 4, whatever you choose to call them, really help you to find a focus. And box number 1 is just look over everything. Look over your most recent self-assessment. If you're a year 1 teacher, you'll look at Module B, and you might look at your portfolio review form with those questions about strengths and then areas for growth. You could look at your district goals and objectives. Absolutely use those for your inquiry focus if you don't want to do a lot of extra work. I am all about killing 2 birds with 1 stone and using your goals and objectives to guide your inquiry so that you're collecting information one time that you use for both induction and for your administrator. That's a great idea. So anyway, you'll look at all of those areas and decide what your area of focus is going to be. Try to drill down to 1 or 2. I wouldn't want to have like a bullet list of 8 different things here. And then based on that, you're going to look at your CSTPs. I would focus in on the power standards if you can and figure out which ones are going to be addressed in the overall idea of your lesson. Again, you probably don't want to have 5 or 6 here. You may want to have 1 or 2. Then you're going to develop a focus question. This is kind of like a research question. You want it to be broad enough that you have some place to go, but you also want it to be narrow enough so that it doesn't include everything in the kitchen sink. Now, the best place to look for these, and this is where I always start, are the CSTP element level questions that are underneath the elements of the CSTP. And through the magic of technology, I've just included a link to those questions on this document. I was going to show you where you could find them in your own virtual portfolio, but it just makes sense to link to it here. So if you click on these, the CSTP element questions link, it will open up a virtual copy of the continuum. Now, the continuum that you have in your Google Drive is just the power standards. This one includes all of the elements of the CSTP. So as you scroll through it, you're going to find, and you will have already read this, pages 2 through 7 for your continuum work because I wanted to make sure you understood what this continuum is all about. But you're going to see the parent standards here, and then each element level standard happens right before that section in the continuum. And underneath are some guiding questions to go with that. So as teachers develop, they may ask, how do I or why do I? And then they give you an entire list of questions that you might ask. I find these to be extremely helpful. I am not a professional researcher, and I think that doing this focus question can be really broad and kind of confusing without having something to guide me. So I'm going to suggest that you might want to start there. All right, coming back to the IIP document, now you've determined an area of focus, you've figured out where on the CSTP that is, and then we might have even used the CSTP element questions to develop a focus question. And certainly you don't have to use the exact question off of that document. You can modify it however you like. And then box number 4 is very, very important. You need to write almost a SMART goal. What % of your students will? And then I would suggest tie it to the summative assessment. So we're really backwards mapping your lesson. We want to figure out how you're going to determine whether or not students learned. So your goal is to see students improve from the entry-level assessment to the summative assessment. And there is a sample IIP, there are actually 2, in your folder, so you can see examples of that. Let me navigate back there now. At the very bottom, I've included a sample from elementary, and you can see a sample of another PT and how she or he wrote this, and then a secondary IIP. And you can see it, it's really similar, very, very similar format. All right, so I wanted to give you that. And after you've written out that, you've got kind of an idea of where you want to go with this lesson series. Now you have to research. When we do action research, we need to go out and get research to figure out how we can best apply our own teaching skills and strategies in the classroom. And what we want you to do to become a really thoughtful and mindful educator is to go and have at least 3 varying types of research. Research means that you can go talk to a colleague, you can talk at your PLC meeting, you can research various sources online. This is not your TE or your TM. This is beyond that. So don't say I looked at the scope and sequence or I looked at my teaching manual. We want to go beyond that. I went to a professional development. I went on an observation. You can absolutely double dip. This research could have occurred in Module B. It could have occurred earlier in the school year. So it doesn't have to be research that you engage in right this minute. And the approximate date, you could just put October 2015 so that, if that's kind of when it occurred, or September, August, or whenever it was. And that just gives an idea as to how long it took you to come up with all of these ideas. Then in the next area, you're looking at the application of that. How are you going to apply what you've learned to the entire lesson series? And the results are going to come later. You remember I said we're going to come back to this document over and over and over again. So this area, box 8, we're probably not going to be able to fill in until the very end of the lesson series, or at least until you have put each of those pieces of research into play. And again, I'm going to encourage you to look at the sample IIPs that I've included so that you get an idea as to what that looks like. Now, you've gone through, you've done all that, and you've given your entry-level assessment, some formative assessments throughout, and your summative. Now you're going to include the numbers. So what number of students took the entry-level assessment? It should be about the same as the ones who took the summative assessment. This is an actual number, 29 or 36. And then you're looking at percentages. What percentage of students met or exceeded proficiency for entry-level assessment? And now we're just looking at the focus students. What percentage of your focus students met or exceeded proficiency? So this should be 33, 67, or 100%. It should never deviate from that. You always have 3 focus students. Your alternates are not included here. And if one of your alternates is included, it's in the place of one of your original focus students. So you will always be basing this off of 3 students. That's why your percentages will always be 33, 67, and 100. And then the same thing with the summative assessment. The reason that this is all here, nice and short and concise, is because it's going to help you when you write your reflection. So now that you're looking over this data and these numbers, you're going to talk about what the impact was on you, the impact on your instructional practice, student achievement, and you want to use specific numbers to talk about that, because we want to get into the mode of using data to back up what we're saying. That's what good educators do. That's what mindful educators do. And then in the second part of number 9, share your learning that occurred. So you're talking about the impact, and then you're talking about your own learning. And these are just some ideas: student development, instructional practice, content, or just yourself as a teacher. And these do not have to be long or wordy. This is just a suggestion list. Obviously, you see and or here. So you just want to show some depth of thought. The IIP is the most important document in all of induction. So this is the place where you don't want to shortchange and you don't want to take shortcuts. Please make sure that you think deeply about these questions and answer them completely. Again, it doesn't have to be crazy long, but it does have to show some depth of thought. And then the last thing you do at the very end of this lesson series, again, this is the very end of that 2 to 3 month period, is talk about applying. We've done this plan, teach, reflect, apply cycle throughout the inquiry. And now you're going to say, how am I going to apply all of that new learning that I just talked about into my future practice? How am I going to take what I've done in this lesson series and apply it to the next unit or to next year when I teach this unit again? I hope that all makes sense. I think it really makes sense when you look at the examples. And again, your CT and I are here for you if you have any questions.